What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another video, and I've got a very special one for you today because Ubisoft invited me to play 4 hours of Assassin's Creed Shadows early, almost 2 months before release, or 2 months after it was supposed to release, or 3 weeks before it was supposed to release again before they pushed it to March 20th. But the whole point of those delays was for the team behind the scenes at Ubisoft to take the time to get it right, and I'm not 100% sure what I was expecting going into Assassin's Creed Shadows, but what I did get is a pretty far departure from what most of the Assassin's Creed games that we've had before has really delivered, coming from someone who's played nearly every game since the original Assassin's Creed all the way back in 2007. So let's get into it. This is my preview of Assassin's Creed Shadows. Let's start things off with the story. You've got Nawe and Yasuke, two totally different warriors with different looks, fighting styles, and backgrounds, but the way that their stories intermingle early on in the Shadows experience is pretty interesting. And obviously I'm not going to drop any spoilers here, but the way these two do come together sets the stage for an overarching story that doesn't really feel forced. In fact, Yasuke and Nawe's mini origin stories in the prologue are very well done. It's a good entry point into the larger world that you're about to explore because they don't just dump you in and tell you to go run off and do stuff. They kind of give you a reason to care, which is something that's obviously very important. But speaking of the larger world, it is absolutely gorgeous. The mountains, the trees, the bushes that blow in the breeze. Didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it did, so we're gonna roll with it. These little details like the leaves on bushes being cut when you're in combat, all of that makes the world of Assassin's Creed Shadows really feel alive. But then you get to the combat, one of the most important parts of any Assassin's Creed game, and it legitimately took me by surprise. Now, we've all heard the interviews and seen the blog post how Nawe and Yasuke are bringing different gameplay styles to the experience. Yasuke is basically a tank that can take a hit just as good as he can deal one, and Nawe is meant to be more of a traditional assassin, sneaking around in the shadows without drawing a lot of attention. And going in, I knew all of this. These are different characters with different feels and different playstyles, but I hit a big learning curve whenever I first really started getting into the flow of the game and trying out the different builds and just feeling out the combat, because going back to something like Assassin's Creed Syndicate, you had Jacob and Evie Fry that both hypothetically had two different gameplay styles, but you could ultimately do just about anything with either of them and it felt pretty much the same. It's totally different with Assassin's Creed Shadows. I went in with the mindset that I wanted to play as Nawe, you know, a lighter, faster sword-slinging assassin, and I died. A lot. Now, can you hold your own in a pinch if you're playing as Nawe? Absolutely, but you better be great at combat because she has a much smaller health bar compared to Yasuke, so a few hits from enemies and she's done. Compare that to Yasuke, who can take more hits but also isn't as fast or agile. Beyond that, they both got their ups and their downs. Nawe is a full-blown assassin, which comes with the hidden blade, being able to climb more easily, throw a grapple hook and climb buildings or swing around on limbs and do the iconic dive into the haystack after getting the lay of the land. And Yasuke can still climb, but just not as well as Nawe, and he doesn't have any kind of grappling hook, and he can dive into haystacks, but they completely explode when he lands on them. But on the flip side, Yasuke can run through doors and just get straight into combat. He's got a couple of extra rations, which are basically health potions. Basically, the big takeaway here is that Yasuke and Nawe have truly distinct playstyles this time around, in a way that makes Shadows completely different than any Assassin's Creed game that I've played to date. But like the team has been saying since the very beginning, you can switch back and forth between either of them as often as you want, as long as you're not in the middle of a mission or combat with the other. In fact, if you want to fast travel to another location on the map, you can spawn in as the other character. You've also got spots that are scattered through the main quest where you can choose to continue as Nawe or Yasuke if you're feeling like you want to switch up the gameplay for a little while. Alternatively, you can just keep playing as the one you like. If you really love the way that Yasuke plays, you don't really have to switch over to Nawe. You can just keep on going through everything and it doesn't really seem to affect the experience one way or another. Now let's focus on that combat, which is basically centered around either stealthy assassinations as Nawe or really brutal assassinations if you're in a pinch as Yasuke that aren't nearly as stealthy. But when you really get into combat with a crowd where it's just open combat, you've got 3 standard types of attacks from enemies that are red, white, and blue. White hits are single hits you can parry, blue hits mean there are multiple hits in a row coming that you can parry, and then red hits are hits you cannot parry and you've got to dodge out of the way to get away from. Now, if you parry all of the hits you can, then the enemies either stagger if they don't have any armor, or their armor breaks a little bit if they've got that beefier second health bar. And all of that feels pretty similar to past Assassin's Creed games. But there are some pretty cool moves, like being able to dodge over an enemy if you hit him from behind, and you've also got different weapon and armor types that you can choose from in this big RPG menu, which is another feature kind of carried over from past RPG-style Assassin's Creed games. Nawe and Yasuke both have different weapon types that you can change in the menus or toy around with mid-combat for stuff you've got pre-selected to find your flow. But you've also got ranged weapons, like a throwing knife kind of weapon, and ninja stars for Nawe, and a musket for Yasuke. And I didn't toy around too much with the ranged weapons during my time with the game, but they're here if you want them or need to use them, and are also good for blowing up barrels and taking out enemies without going all in and blowing your cover. Big fan of that for Nawe. And you've also got a ton of these kind of power moves or skills that you can use during combat and level up in a skill tree as you progress through the game. And I didn't poke around in this menu too much, but you've got a lot of options here to pick the style that works for each character and the way that you want to play. Like Yasuke has this comically powerful kick, and Nawe can go in for a quick and close attack. These are different skills that feel right for each of their different gameplay styles. Another element of the gameplay here is you can also command this little army of shinobi in a couple of different ways. You can either order them to come help in a fight or attack from a distance, but on top of that, you can also send scouts out if you need to find a point of interest for your next mission. The way this works is you'll get a prompt that the next mission is, say, southeast of the city, and you've got to find somebody's house. You can drop a single scout there that'll have a radius they can explore, and then you can add more scouts if you want to increase that radius of exploration and explore more stuff and increase the potential you'll find anything. Now that takes away some of the focus on climbing up to a high point of interest and synchronizing like older Assassin's Creed games. And don't get me wrong, you can still climb up high and get the lay of the land, zoom in, and pick different points of interest to explore. The higher up you are, the more you can see, so there's still tons of value in doing that. And then you've, of course, got your leap of faith. But the developers want this to feel different this time around, and they're trying to bring back more of a sense of discovery and exploration with Assassin's Creed Shadows. They've said that during interviews, and even after just a couple of minutes, things do feel more open-ended. You've got to look for clues in the environment with eagle vision if you're Nawe, or if you're Yasuke, you don't have that because you're not an assassin. But both of them can kind of enter in this focus mode and look for blue dots that signify points of interest for a mission that you should probably go over and explore. And this is a subtle difference, but it definitely does feel less directed when you put it up alongside past games. That makes this feel like it's less of the box checking and hand holding you do get from a lot of Ubisoft games. Now, I do want to talk about a couple of concerns that I have so far. Earlier, I said the combat was way more unforgiving compared to past games, and I stand behind that, but there are points where it's just so unforgiving to the point that I wonder if it's like a gameplay design issue. Like if I'm using some of those ultimates or skill abilities I was talking about, other enemies can still attack and deal damage. Thinking about something like the Batman Arkham games, if you're fighting in a crowd, you can kind of deal with them one at a time, but you've got to deflect and pop around to different people. But there's never really a time when you literally can't defend yourself. That's not the situation with Assassin's Creed Shadows. At least that's something I saw from my experience that definitely will take some getting used to. Now that could also totally go away after I spend more time with the game and wander around the world and just learn the ropes of fighting. And I do think that Shadows is really encouraging people to break those button mashing habits that I know I built with older Assassin's Creed games and lean more into methodical, intentional combat choices. You've got to take time to process every hit, block, parry, and dodge, and this can feel like you're really a samurai in feudal Japan, but I do wonder if that kind of gameplay style is going to mesh well with longtime Assassin's Creed RPG style fans, or even if new players that are checking this out for the first time are going to enjoy it. But looking past those gripes with the combat, Ubisoft has really cranked up the quality with the visuals. The detail on the main characters and main cutscenes is very solid, even compared to recent games. You've got some soul in those eyes. Now, your mileage may vary on the secondary cutscenes or cutaways for dialogue that you find out there in the world. They don't look bad, don't get me wrong, but you can definitely tell there was a little bit more care taken on Nawe and Yasuke in those emotional story moments. But the good news here is those emotional story moments do look and feel good. Even in my little time with the game I had earlier this week, I do think that there's a lot of good here when it comes to the main narrative and the way the characters' backstories are intermingled. There's a beautiful world and some very impressive visuals compared to past Assassin's Creed games that both really come together to drive home events in a pretty powerful way. So far, I think there is a good game here. I'm very impressed with what I've seen, but early on in that early build that I played, it's clear Ubisoft taking that extra time to dial in these details has paid off. But I want to play the full game before making any final calls on whether it hits those highs. So far, pretty impressed. But those are just my thoughts, and I'd love to know what you think down below. How are you feeling about Assassin's Creed Shadows going into launch? What do you think about this gameplay? And if you have any questions, let me know down below and I can try to answer them. And of course, if you're new here, you like what you see and what you hear, hit that subscribe button for videos like this every week and gaming news shorts throughout the week to keep you in the loop. And I'll catch you on the next one.